My name is Yehuda Singer, and I am a licensed Israeli tour guide. I live with my wife Edna in Mitzpeh, Yericho, overlooking the ancient city of Jericho, close to 35 years. Please join me for a visit to the city of David. For those of you who are in the diaspora, this is a formidable challenge to study the Bible besides from the Hebrew language. By visiting these biblical locations where certain dramas took place and examining the artifacts and realia, we can more easily understand what transpired. The dull black and white film suddenly becomes technicolor and engages both our minds and our souls. We're going to join the likes of King David and his military commanders. Perhaps we can even listen in on the conversation between King David and his advisors. King David reigned over Judah for 7.5 years in Hebron, and the other tribes are now requesting that he also rule over them. Does this change require him to relocate the nation's capital? No? Mm-hmm. No? What? Let's begin. Why did King David choose Jerusalem to relocate his nation's capital? This is our question for tonight, at least the beginning. Well, we have certain motives: political, strategic, defense, economic, traditional beliefs, and spiritual. Let's take a look at the political. We see that all the tribes of Israel came to David, as written in the second book of Samuel, and they sealed a covenant with him in Hebron. And they anointed David, who ruled over all of Israel and administered justice and kindness to his entire people. Now, what could David do to foster a good feeling among all of the tribes? He moves and he looks for the right place to move his capital to. He moves from Hebron in the southern part of the country. He moves it to what we are familiar with calling Jerusalem, but originally it was Jebus or Yavus. Where is this Yavus? Where we first encountered the name of Yavus, the original name of Jerusalem. Here in the listing of the boundaries of the different tribes in the book of Joshua, we see it is mentioned. Back to our motives. We mentioned political motives. We mentioned defense and strategic. Well, natural topography provides defense. If you notice, to the left in the picture, we have the Central Valley and we have the Kidron Valley. So basically, from east and west, we're pretty much covered. Up on the top, it's more level, and therefore he had to build needed fortifications. And also we have, very important, I have an arrow pointing to it, is the Gihon Spring. Because without water in antiquity, especially before the Romans showed up with their aqueducts, if you don't have water, you can't live. So many cities face the same problem in antiquity. In order to forestall such crisis in the future, it was a common practice to dig an underground tunnel linking the city to its water source. For example, Givon, another example, Gezer, another one, Hatzor, the one that's up in the Galil, and other cities. The city of Jerusalem and its surrounding Jebusite territories were an enclave in the heart of the country, which existed from the time of the conquest of Joshua till the Davidic monarchy and perhaps afterwards. In the chapter concerning the request of the land led by Joshua and its parallel sources in Judges, Jerusalem is mentioned 5 times, always paired with the name Yevusi, Jebusite. It's particularly worthwhile to point out the list of cities in the territory of Benjamin at the end of Joshua chapter 18. The scripture enumerates 26 cities in the territory of Benjamin, in which Yevus is Jerusalem, is number 24 in the list. The significance of its place in the list is because Jerusalem was still not annexed to the land conquered by Joshua at that time. Another one of our reasons was we mentioned traditional beliefs and spiritual. Well, according to the Gemara in Yuma, the rabbis of our Talmud, the sages of the Talmud tell us that the foundation rock, which you see in the picture here underneath the dome of the rock, is the epicenter of the world from which the world was created. Another important belief is the binding of Isaac, Akedat Yitzchak. Professor Moshe Halamish of Bar Ilan University says the Akedah became in Jewish thought the supreme example of self-sacrifice in obedience, an actual test as an enduring cornerstone of religious behavior which can be attained by everyone. The verse says Abraham named the place Hashem Yireh, and God will see. We're going to see how this name is very important. Another one of our motives was close proximity to main trade routes. You see in the picture, we have the Via Maris going up the coast, and we have the King's Highway more inland. Let's summarize until now. The summary reasons why King David chose to relocate his capital. Political motive, David sought a location for his capital that would be centrally located for all the tribes, therefore serving as a unifying factor. Strategic motive, the Gihon spring outside the Jebusite city provided water to the city. A defense motive, the topography of Yevus provided a safe modicum of defense from their enemies. Economic motive, close proximity to the King's Highway and the Via Maris. Traditional beliefs and spiritual motive, the religious traditions ascribe to Mount Moriah, the place of creation and the sacrifice of Isaac. Now, where did the name Jerusalem originate from? If we said that it was called originally Jebus or Yevus. Well, we mentioned before the Akedah, Hashem Yireh, that's part of it. And we have here the other verse in Bereshit, that Malkit Tzedek, the king of Shalem, right? So we put those two together, Hashem Yireh and Shalem, and we get Yerushalayim. Again, the etymology of the name Jerusalem. Let me go back and let me tell you what the rabbis wrote in the Midrash Bereshit Rabbah. The Midrash explains that the name of the city is actually made up of two names based on Avram's two distinct encounters with the city. His meeting with Malkit Tzedek, king of Shalem, in the 14th chapter of Genesis, and the story of the Akedah in the 22nd chapter. From the Midrash, it arises that the name of the city is formed as a result of two different events. In other words, the character of the city is a combination of two different qualities. Aside from this, from the language of the Midrash, we learn that the Holy One tried, as it were, to join these two qualities together and to integrate them into the same place. In order for Jerusalem to exist, these two meanings must be unified. Different interpretations may be attached to this name combination, pointing to different ways of understanding the character of the city and the combination of its two elements. If, indeed, the combination of both names is meant to indicate a merging of the heavenly Jerusalem and the earthly city, we may propose that Abraham in the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, represents the heavenly Jerusalem, while his encounter with Malki Tzedek, king of Shalem, represents the earthly Jerusalem. Those words I found by Rabbi Yitzhak Levi, a teacher in the Herzog School. All right. The demography of Yavuz. We mentioned, why did David have to conquer Yavuz to become the nation's capital? Yavuz was a foreign Canaanite enclave in the center of the country, as substantiated by this comment by the youth servant to his master in the story of Pelegesh Begivah, the concubine in Givah. Yavuz, he says, a heathen city is not a befitting place for us to stay for the night. In Hebron, I mentioned King David reigned over Judah for 7.5 years. And in Jerusalem, he reigned over Israel for another 33 years. Let's see this little video about the story.
About 3,000 years ago, David, son of Jesse, is crowned king of Israel. This is the beginning of the royal house of David. David decides that Jerusalem, positioned at the heart of the Israelite territory, will be the capital of his kingdom. But Jerusalem is a powerful and intimidating Canaanite city, and until David's time, no tribe has been able to conquer it. Now, once again, confident of their fortifications, the Jebusites take up positions on the city walls. The young King David challenges the complacent enemy. He is determined. This time, Jerusalem must fall.
אני עומד על המדרון המזרחי של עיר דוד. כאן בשנת 1995 מצאו הארכיאולוגים פרופסור רוני רייך ואלי שוקרון שרידים של מגדל ענק שנבנה על ידי הכנענים לפני כ-4,000 שנה. האבנים האלה, שכל אחת מהן שוקלת מספר רב של טונות, הן חלק ממגדל עצום שנבנה ממש כאן בסמוך למעיין הגיחון.
You shall not come in here. The Jebusites mock David. They station blind and lame men on the city walls. The message is clear. The city is so strong that even the blind and the lame can easily defend it.
דוד מבין שבדרכים מקובלות הוא לא יצליח לכבוש את העיר. הוא צריך לחשוב מחוץ לקופסה. הראש שלו כבר נרקמת מזימה.
He promises the esteemed position of head of the army to the soldier who dares to volunteer for this dangerous mission and succeeds. One man rises to the challenge, Joab ben Zeruiah, a tough and daring soldier. But what is the mission? In his challenge, David uses two mysterious words, Veiga batzinor. What is this tzinor that David is referring to? Thousands of years later, a fascinating discovery was made, shedding light on the mysterious tzinor. In 1867, the archaeologist Captain Charles Warren crawled through a tunnel near the Gihon Spring. About 20 meters from the spring, Warren discovered a vertical shaft that rose to a height of 13 meters above his head. With great effort, Warren climbed to the top of the shaft, where, to his amazement, he discovered that the tunnel continued to rise steeply until it reached the city above.
אורן הבין מיד שלפניו מפעל מים סודי שנבנה לפני אלפי שנים. התכנון היה מתוחכם ביותר. הכנענים ידעו שנקודת התורפה של איראן היא המעיין שנמצא מחוץ לחומות העיר.
They built a great citadel around the spring and dug a tunnel down from the city above to the citadel surrounding the spring.
דוד מגלה את מפעל המים הקדום. זה הצינור.
He sends Joab ben Zeruiah through this tunnel to infiltrate the city. After Joab exits the tunnel, he runs down to the city gates. The Jebusite soldiers fail to notice him. Job reaches the city gates and opens them with great force. Before the Jebusites can grasp what has happened, David's soldiers burst through the gates and take the city by surprise. But David captured the fortress of Zion, which is the city of David.
Everybody enjoyed that? Moving up to recent times in the 1860s, we ran across our friend we saw in the film before, in the video, Charles Warren. There are a few countries in the world in which surveying and mapping played so much important role in its history. Palestine, the Holy Land, was long coveted by foreigners, primarily the Crusaders and the European colonists. They wanted to know its physical and historical characteristics as a prelude to conquering the land. Europe intensified its efforts to rediscover Palestine in the second half of the 19th century. Of these efforts, the work of the Palestine Exploration Fund, the PEF, stands out in its geographical scope and comprehensiveness. The PEF was founded under the royal patronage of Queen Victoria in 1865 by a group of distinguished academics and clergymen. The declared purpose of the PEF survey was investigating the archaeology, geography, geology, and natural history of Palestine. However, the underlying agenda of the founding subscribers to PEF was to find the location of Solomon's temple, the date of the construction of the Dome of the Rock, and the original site of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Apart from the biblical research, PEF survey collected valuable data on Palestinian villages, wells, religious sites, roads, and terrain, which served the purposes of the British occupation of Palestine in 1917 and 1918. Lieutenant Charles Warren was the head of the excavations in Jerusalem. His work there took place in the areas surrounding the Temple Mount, and as excavation of the Temple Mount itself was banned by the Ottoman authorities. Following this decree, he conducted an excavation of the area south of the Temple Mount and uncovered a massive fortification, which led him to explore the hill at the foot of the Temple Mount, known today as the City of David Hill. In October 1867, he entered the Gihon Spring and began to investigate the underground tunnels surrounding the spring. There he discovered a vertical shaft that led to a man-made tunnel connecting the spring at the foot of the hill to the hill's peak. Warren used his own money to continue excavation after the PEF committee stopped sending funds. I will entertain questions after the presentation, so hold on there. Let's go back to our story. We have the conquest of this place, Rus, but years later, David decided he must bring the Holy Ark, which was in the Prosdor of Yerushalayim at Kiryat Ya'arim, and he must bring it up to the Holy City. There's a beautiful picture by James Tissot of how he's dancing in front of the Ark. Not he, but he and all Israel were involved in this great celebration. This act demonstrates David's willingness to combine the political and spiritual capital in Jerusalem. In the second book of Samuel, chapter 7, and also in Chronicles, first book, and chapter 17, we read, after the king was settled in his palace, and the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies around him, he said to Nathan the prophet, here I am, living in a house of cedar, while the ark of Hashem, God, remains in a tent. Fast forward, on August the 4th, 2005, Eilat Mazar, archaeologist from Hebrew University, announced she had discovered in Jerusalem what may have been the palace of the biblical King David. according to the Bible, second king of the United King of Israel, who may have ruled in the late 11th, early 10th century BCE, before the Common Era, now referred to as the large stone structure. Mazar's discovery consists of a public building. She dated from the 10th century BCE, a copper scroll, pottery from the same period, and a clay bula. We'll talk about that in a minute. Or inscribed seal of Yuchal, son of Shelemiah, son of Shevi, an official mentioned at least twice in the book of Jeremiah. In July 2008, she also found a second bula belonging to Gedaliah ben Pashhur, was mentioned together with Yuchal in the same chapter 38 in Jeremiah, in the same verse. Regarding her dating of the city of David findings in general and the large stone structure in particular, the chronological data recovered in her excavations indicate that the sole Iron Age fortification system extending in this area was in use during the 8th and 7th centuries BCE. However, according to the biblical sources, the Solomonic city wall must have passed here. Hence, she maintains, Eilat Mazar, the fortification system in question must be Solomonic in date. Here we have Psalm number 122, which just quote a little bit. Omdutai Yurag Lenu B'Sharayat Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim Habenuyah, Ke'ir Shechubrala Yachdav. The Jerusalem is built like a city that is closely compacted together. That is where the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord, to praise the name of the Lord. Rav Yitzchak Levi, who I mentioned before, explains Jerusalem is two that are actually one. Rabbeinu Bachaye, one of the commentators of the Bible, in the book of Bamidbar, Numbers, explains this verse in Tehillim, in the Psalms. Jerusalem built up like a city that has been joined together as follows. This is the secret of the etymology of the name Yerushalayim, indicating two, like Einayim, two eyes, Aznayim, two ears, and so on. Here we see, and we're going to let you put on another short video, and we're going to mention Kathleen Kenyon, who was excavating between 1962 and 67, and Eilat Mazar. Let me turn on.
She said you didn't dig deep enough. And we said to her, okay, we are willing to go, but you have to tell us why. And she said to us 60 years ago, a woman named Kathleen Kenyon found a capital broken into in a landslide, and that capital is Phoenician style. Phoenicia is the modern day Lebanon. It dates back 3,000 years. And when I opened my Bible, she said, I read about a king, Hiram of Tyre, and he came and he helped David to build his house, Solomon to build his house, and to ultimately to build the house of God. The second thing is we found houses built into the walls of the ancient city dating back to the first temple period. And that means that we are very close to some kind of citadel here. Within those houses we found furniture, and that furniture dates back 3,000 years. The third reason is the city itself lies between two valleys. We have the Kidron Valley, you guys can see it on that side, and at the back of me another. Between these valleys we have the city situated. Very difficult to take the city. So difficult that the Jebusite king said, not gonna happen. Eilat Mazar, she said, on the north side, it is level. It means that you're gonna have to put something here to keep the city safe.
Yeah. She came with her Bible in hand and kept reading it and referring to it and looking for reference points and kept finding those reference points as she dug.
I think that's very important if you want to find the Bible.
Okay, this is the first time in the annals of Israeli archaeology that two clay bulai with two biblical names that appear in the same verse of the Bible have been found in the same location. The fact that these two bulai were found on the site indicates that the building in which they were found may have been used by the king's administration until the destruction of the first temple. Now, I want to be intellectually honest. what I did is I gave you the Eilat Mazar rendition of the story, and she believes that this is the palace of King David. Well, there are very formidable archaeologists in the field. One of a dissenting opinion, his name is Israel Finkelstein, who has a whole different way of chronology. It's called low chronology, and he doesn't believe that this is from that period. And he also feels that there's not enough substantial building to warrant calling this capital city of a nation. So just want you to know that there are opinions, and this is a debate that keeps on going on, and we haven't seen, the jury hasn't come in yet. So I showed you Kathleen, what's written on the slide. Kathleen Kenyon discovers this Ionic capital here, which may connect the Phoenicians in Tyre, who were contracted by King David to deliver the heavy building materials to build his palace. First book of Kings, same thing, first book of Chronicles. Okay, what we're looking at now is a picture of, actually from south to north. Archaeologists of Eilat Mazar again, of the Hebrew University and the Shalom Center announced the find of 2008 of a clay bula seal impression described with the name. Right. Aside from the archaeological discoveries there, the Bible tells us that how David went down to the fortress when he feared an attack by the Philistines, according to the second book of Samuel, chapter 5. Where did he go down from? This photo helps provide the answer. It is taken looking north, facing the spur known as the City of David, the oldest settled portion of Jerusalem. Beyond it is the Temple Mount, where David's son Solomon built the temple. Marked on the photo are Area H, where Kathleen Kenyon found parts of what Mazar has now identified as a large public structure. To the south of it is the massive stepstone structure, a portion hillside blanketed with large blocks that must have supported a major building on the slope above it. The Gihon Spring, ancient Jerusalem's only source of fresh water, and the Kidron Valley east of the city. Eilat Mazar suggests that the stepstone structure was part of the same complex as David's palace. Our suggestion may seem odd at first. Why would David have built his royal residence beyond Jerusalem's fortified walls? Because there was no room within the small walled city. Mazar answers, the palace required no protection in normal times, peaceful times. When a threat loomed, David and his entourage could quickly go down, as the Bible said, to the city's fortress a few feet to the south. This is really the slide that I should have mentioned 3 or 4 before, and this is just giving you a Wikipedia definition. I'm going to read it out loud, what a bula is. Transactions for trading needed to be accounted for efficiently, so the clay tokens were placed in a clay ball, bula, which prevented dishonesty and kept all the tokens together. In order to account for the tokens, the bula would have to be crushed to reveal their content. Seals were impressed into the opening of the bula to prevent tampering. Each party had its own unique seal to identify them. Seals would not only identify individuals, but it would also identify their office. Okay, I quote from head archaeologist Dr. Eilat Mazar. It is not very often that such a discovery happens in which real figures of the past shake off the dust of history and so vividly revive the stories of the Bible.
2005, we found a very important seal. 3 years later, we also found another seal, and these 2 seals are very, very important. 2 seals that appears in the same book in the Bible, Jeremiah, in the same chapter, in the same verse, back to each other. Gedalia ben Pashur, Yuchal ben Shelemiah. Written in the Bible, written on the seals. So that tells us that we are in the governmental area of that time. The time of King David dates back 3,000 years. The time of these guys, 2,800 years. And we know that in that time, this was the governmental seat.
Okay. As important as it was, Mount Moriah, right, remained even after David's conquest in the hands of King Aravna of Jebus, or Yebus, and his sons, and continued using the mountain as a threshing floor for his wheat crops. Not until a tragedy took place did David purchase it and proclaim it a Jewish place of worship. The Torah forbids the taking of a census to tally the Jewish population. Thus, when King David made such a count, a terrible plague struck 70,000 of his subjects. David saw the angel of God standing between heaven and earth, his unsheathed sword stretched out over Jerusalem. To stop the purge, the king climbed the mountain and offered a desperate prayer. The plague ceased, and David reached Aravna's threshing floor. The angel lowered his weapon. David, then realized that this place was to be the house of God and the burnt offering altar of Israel. Aravna offered the site to David free of charge, but David refused. By paying, David avoided any future claims to legally purchased land. According to the Genesis Rabbah Midrash, Hebron and Shechem are the other two places in Israel whose Jewish possession cannot be contested. The money was collected from all the 12 tribes, 59 shekels from each, so all would share equally in the temple. The Bible offers no overt indication of a displacement of the resident Jebusites, that is to say, Canaanite landholders. Witness David's acquisition of the threshing floor of Aravna, the Jebusite, by purchase rather than by royal fiat. Now I want to shift and move up, fast forward a few hundred years, to a man that left his indelible imprint on his book in the Bible by Jeremiah the prophet. Only during the Davidic and Solomonic monarchies was there national solidarity. Due to a governing era refusing, Solomon's son Rehoboam refused to lower the taxes, the nation split into two, the nation of Israel and the nation of Judea. Jeremiah lived at a time of deep upheaval in Jewish history, most significantly the destruction of the First Temple in 586 BC and the exile of the Jewish people to Babylonia. Much of the book of Jeremiah is a lengthy tirade against the people for their faithlessness and ominous warnings of the destruction to come if they do not mend their ways. Jeremiah himself was scorned by the people to whom he preached, arrested, beaten, and left in a pit. King Tzidkiyahu, the last ruler of Judah, had him in prison for warning of the fall of Jerusalem. Like I said, this is 624 BCE, and we're going to see that he goes on, that later on the Babylonians defeat the Assyrians. So we had the Assyrians, and 4 years earlier, the Egyptian army of Pharaoh Necho II was delayed at Megiddo, 30 kilometers southeast of Haifa, by the forces of King Josiah of Judah. Josiah was killed, and his army was defeated at the Battle of Megiddo in 609 BCE. The Egyptians met the full might of the Babylonian and Median army, led by Nebuchadnezzar II at Kark Harchamish, an important ancient capital in the northern part of the region of Syria, where the combined Egyptian and Assyrian forces were destroyed. Assyria ceased to exist as an independent power, and Egypt retreated, was no longer a significant force in the ancient Near East. Babylonia reached its economic peak after 605 BC. Yehoiakim, as you can read in Jeremiah 36, he also fails to realize that Jeremiah is predicting destruction, and he takes the scroll, as you see in the picture, and he throws it into the fire and burns Jeremiah's scroll. Because what had happened is that Jeremiah, as we see in the, let's say, verse 4, Jeremiah called Baruch ben Neriah, and while Yirmiyahu dictated all the words the Lord had spoken to him, Baruch wrote them on the scroll. Then Yirmiyahu told Baruch, I am in prison. I am not allowed to go to the Lord's temple. So you go to the Beit HaMikdash on a day of fasting and you read this scroll that I dictated to you. He does, and eventually gets to the king and he burns it. Yehoiakim. In the eighth year of the reign of the king of Babylon, he took Yehoiakim prisoner. As the Lord had declared, Nebuchadnezzar removed the treasures from the temple of the Lord and from the royal palace and cut up the gold articles that Shlomo Melech had made for the temple of the Lord. He carried all Yerushalayim into exile, all the officers and fighting men, all the skilled workers and artisans, a total of 10,000. Only the poorest people of the land were left. So why did I write the first exile to Babylon? That's in 598 BCE. Wait, later on is going to be a second exile. Jeremiah continues to preach against the rule of King Tzidkiyahu and the futility confronting the Babylonians, suggesting submission without battle. Okay, moving on, sorry. Second exile to Babylon. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. Psalm 137. This is at the time, 586, when the temple is destroyed along all of Jerusalem. Some Jews have the custom of reading this psalm, Naharot Bavel, prior to the recitation of grace after meals during the weekdays. Others are familiar with the words that may be recited by the bride and groom under the chuppah, the bridal canopy, in remembering the destruction of Jerusalem. Here, 51 foolish have discovered one bearing the name of Gemaru, son of Shaphan.
A very large structure that was built somewhere in the late 8th or 7th century BC and was destroyed in a big fire, most probably in 586 BC during the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem. The room was preserved and it was filled with the destruction, most probably of the second floor above it. What you can see behind me, for example, stones from the walls of the second store, burnt beams, and pottery vessels that was probably in the house when it was destroyed.
This building is known as the House of Achiel since it contained shards, probably from a cooking vessel, bearing the name Achiel. But we cannot be certain that this was the name of its owner. House was built in the 7th century BCE and continued to exist till the destruction of the city in 586 BC. It is fashioned in the style of the four-room house, which was common in Eretz Yisrael during the first temple period. You can see actually down below, I usually point out to people, there's a stone toilet seat. One of the earliest toilets discovered in Eretz Yisrael. According to the Talmud, this is a sign of a wealthy man. In the house on the right, excavations revealed signs of conflagration. We saw that in the video just now, which attested the destruction that was the fate of Jerusalem in 586. Ruins of a house containing remnants of a burnt piece of wood furniture, which botanists identify as wood from the boxwood tree that grows in Syria. This attests to the commercial ties between Eretz Yisrael and Syria in that period. Also to the fact that the people are wealthy enough to import their furniture from Syria. Well, that takes us to the end of the slides. My wish, before I take away the share here, I would like to wish everybody, first, that we finish with this corona, and then everybody will be free to get on a plane and come here and see these sites with their own two eyes. And we'll be able to study together the Bible and walk through these famous places together. I also hope that people will begin to do what Rabbi Benny Lau, he formed a whole organization called Tesha Shtayim Tesha, 929 chapters in the Bible. He has people reading the Bible on a daily basis. He has a whole site worthwhile looking up. Okay, I'm opening up opening up the chat. See. I'm trying to open the chat. What do I see here? Oh, okay. It's very nice to see friends from Beck and Phyllis in the diaspora. I'm happy to see a lot of people. Anybody have any questions? Anything to ask? Because I bet you everybody's on mute. I can only mute myself. If I don't see any questions, I will. Any questions from anybody? Okay. I enjoyed tonight's giving me your attention to this long presentation. Have a good night.